everyone, welcome back. And today we're luckily joined by the man behind DapperMedia himself, Dan. Thank you very much for giving us a little bit of time today, man. It's great to chat, and I know you're a big fight fan yourself, so it's always good to connect minds and sit down and chat. How's everything going for you today, my man?
Pretty good, bro. No complaints, honestly. No, just life. Just covering the fights, and then pretty much just life, like school, work situation, everything else, and then just happen to be watching fights on top of that. But just happy to be here.
100%, bro. Dan, I want to start off by asking you: is there a fight this year? And I thought of this question the other night, which is, I thought of this. It's not a question that gets asked a lot, but is there sort of a fight that exceeded your expectation this year? Because I think, for me personally, one that comes to mind straight off the bat, one that going into it, I didn't have very high expectations for. Coming out of it, I had the biggest, I thought it was the greatest fight I'd seen at that time, which was Yuri and Glover Teixeira 1. That, for me, was a fight that exceeded my expectation. What was a fight that exceeded your expectation this year?
Honestly, if I'm being completely honest, I have a performance in mind, but in terms of fight that exceeded my expectations, I would honestly have to say Tsarukyan versus Gamrot. That's definitely a fight that exceeded my expectations, because going into it, we already knew that, my dog is barking.
That's all right.
That's all right. But we already knew going into it that, Arman Tsarukyan is this great young talent, and maybe a little bit of bias from me because he's an Armenian fighter and I'm an Armenian guy. But I think that also just going into it, the thing that it bothered me about it was that it didn't exceed the expectation. It didn't kind of going into it on paper, catch the eye of like the casual demographic. But, for us hardcore fans, it was definitely something that, caught our eye. This is a fight with maybe even like, contender implications, which it definitely did, because we saw Gamrot fought Dariush right after. But, going into it, we knew how skilled both of these guys were. But to get the display of, high quality mixed martial arts that we got, with both of them showing amazing scrambles, exceeding what I had kind of thought was, present in the striking department. Tsarukyan showed some beautiful striking. Gamrot kind of held his own beautifully. Gamrot showed some really great jiu-jitsu control, It was just one of those really technical bouts where already going into it, you're excited. Then coming out of it, you're just like, damn, it was just that much better. And then for performance, I would definitely say like Brandon Moreno versus Kattar France. That was Moreno. Just, I think going into that, I had kind of thought Kai has kind of done everything, in terms of preparation. I felt like it was almost like the four elements. Every fighter he had fought leading up to that point had kind of encompassed some sort of dynamic of mixed martial arts, where Rogerio Bontorin was this grappler, Askarov was the wrestler, and Cody was the striker, and everything was kind of leading him up to this big showdown with Moreno. And then Moreno just completely changed it up, with the he was feinting with his hands, with his hands within his guard, which is very uncharacteristic. But I mean, those two performances stand out to me.
Yeah, for sure. So, look, I wanted to know your reaction to the TJ and Aljamain Sterling fight. As, through no fault of the champion, unfortunately, the fight became a bit of a disappointment. And, do you think that TJ should have disclosed this injury to the UFC, considering, you have fans that are paying, $60, $70, $80 for the fight, depending on where you live? And look, realistically, I love TJ. And one thing I love about the sport is that fighters will push through injuries. But with the shoulder in the condition that he had it, he didn't really have a chance of winning that fight.
No, definitely. I think there's kind of two ways to look at this bout, because obviously you've got to look at it from kind of the humanity aspect, where, fighters already, TJ, with the layoff that he had, the time that he was away from the sport, sometimes it just comes down to flat out, they need the money. They need to fight. They need to just make that money. And, TJ, with the inactivity that he's shown, just because of age and just because of obviously the suspension, going into this fight, it's a title fight. That there's pay-per-view points attached to this. That there's a lot of eyes coming into it. Just the circumstances, I don't think that are really that to pull out of a title fight. But I do think that, just going into this, it kind of, like you said, I don't want to take away anything from Aljamain Sterling, because ultimately a lot of fighters go into that cage injured to some degree. And I think that realistically speaking, this is a guy that has shown kind of an inability to stay healthy off the PEDs, and we see the difference, quite literally night and day. When the Sandhagen fight, he tore his LCL, that kept him out for quite some time, and then what he said about his shoulder, which was he popped it out some 20 times. It's just it's hard to envision, it's ultimately the fans kind of get the short end of the stick. It's hard to envision a fight where that's kind of the case. But I do think that it kind of comes down a little bit to the UFC's lack of preparation, where like, I feel like they hadn't really had a lack of preparation. They had the two, like they do with cards, they have that backup fight, that kind of eliminator to kind of have a replacement in mind. So I'm actually kind of surprised the UFC didn't kind of decide to go down that path. And I think ultimately a little bit of blame will go kind of to every party. I think TJ is kind of to blame for not saying anything, but also I understand, the circumstances. These fighters have to make a living.
Yeah, 100%. Dan, something I want to know, man, is because you built the page up so much, over the years, and what was your sort of introduction to MMA, and what originally, was there a fight that gravitated you towards becoming a fan of the sport?
Well, first and foremost, I think that like, for me, it was just natural kind of getting into mixed martial arts. I think that like, for me, like the fight that got me into it, and again, it goes back to my Armenian roots, is Gegard Mousasi versus Mark Munoz. That was a fight way back in the day, not the biggest on paper, but it was something that really caught my eye, seeing my fellow countrymen going into the octagon, fighting such a game opponent, and, putting on a performance like that. It definitely introduced me to the sport. And then obviously, just growing up in the Conor McGregor era, that's something that a lot of people don't like to admit, is like, Conor, whether you like him or not, Conor McGregor is, to attribute to a lot of the fans of the sport now. And I think that, growing up through that era, and then really just after UFC 229, taking a liking to the sport to a whole nother level, watching the pay-per-views, like Cormier versus Lewis was, I think, my first formal kind of pay-per-view I watched. And then, and then like going through there, Poirier versus Holloway 2, Masvidal Diaz, all these great big fights. And then I think like Adesanya versus Whittaker was kind of like that catalyst card for me, which kind of brought everything together where, okay, I'm watching like, the prelims, I'm watching the main card, everything's just kind of clicking on all four cylinders.
For sure. So look, getting into it then, something else I want to ask you is, in a general sense, from your perspective, what's one of the biggest issues with MMA media today that should be addressed?
Well, I think first and foremost is just kind of the lack of opportunities being provided to the up and coming guys. I think that that's really an important thing. And I also think it's just kind of the inexcusable nature of the upper echelon of this sports media coverage, where they kind of don't recognize that there's a new wave coming. And like Joe Rogan says in that infamous debate, like where you see him arguing with Lou DiBella, he says that the sport of boxing is getting swallowed. And I think that the same kind of holds true for this old age of media, because we already are all getting kind of sick of it. I'll be honest, I have nothing against John Morgan, but I think the way he covers the sport is pretty fucking boring. I'm not even going to lie. I don't enjoy watching John Morgan ask these same redundant questions. There's no sense of humanity. There's no sense of, that different aspect where you really dive into who a fighter is. There's nothing about that kind of catches my eye, makes me want to keep watching, and makes me want to keep listening to what you have to say. Whereas, as opposed to maybe someone like you guys, maybe someone like myself, or someone like, one of the guys that I talk to, like Stand 'Em Up, or, MMA Poet, those guys, all of these up and coming guys, and like, even like MMA Theory, MDG, MMA, these are all, writing guys that write, guys that interview, everything of that sort. And these are guys that are showing emotion. They're showing a sense of interest into the fighters themselves. And that's kind of like a bothersome aspect for me, is like, also it's a sense of entitlement that comes with the positions. Like, these older kind of more, I guess, traditional, conventional round people, they see, us as like, people who took this up as a hobby, and we kind of pay respect to what we're doing as like kind of, taboo. We didn't put in the work. But I think that our success and the new age of social media, it's kind of impossible to really, it's not impossible to go down the traditional route and find a job, but why would you go down that traditional route when you can do it, without having to go through all that nonsense, doing it because you love it and getting that success? So it's kind of a lengthy explanation, but I think it truly just comes down to, I think that the new age of the sport kind of understands how to connect with the fighters a whole lot better, whereas the older generation doesn't really know how to click with them on that level aspect, just because of the age discrepancy. A lot of fighters, like for me, I like video games a lot. I'm probably gonna hop on Call of Duty when I'm not fucked with homework right now, but like I like talking to the fighters about video games. I like talking to them about movies. I like talking to them about all this stuff, because that's what connects me to them. That's where my interests coincide with theirs, and that's where I get my enjoyment for the sport out of, just knowing that there's more to them than the fighting.
100%. That's a good point you put up, because I think Alex Buchanan from Cage Side First does a good thing on humanizing athletes, which I like very much as well, which is a new age sort of thing as well. Dan, something I want to know is, I saw on your post that you're looking to actually compete yourself, and so what are your plans, for your first bout, and is there a specific sort of art or that you sort of that you gravitate towards, maybe BJJ, boxing, wrestling?
No, yeah, definitely. For me, I think it's primarily Nogi Jiu-Jitsu. That's my preference. I love, this new age of grappling is kind of what's pulled me into the sport a whole nother level, getting to train Jiu-Jitsu myself, and also just like doing Muay Thai from time to time at the gym when they have the classes, doing that kind of stuff. That's kind of what has gotten my interest. I think the main thing for me is my goals are just kind of coincide. It's all over the place. Like, I think for me, it's like, because I'm also like a student, I'm balancing that. I'm running the page and I'm doing like all of these different things. My goal is like more realistically, like just to kind of get a baseline and really just kind of build a foundation in one discipline and then really just go on. And that would be jiu-jitsu. Obviously, that's kind of where I've really shown an interest, is that grappling, like, with the Sambo guys kind of showing a new case of grappling. And then obviously, with the, ADCC, Gordon Ryan, the Rotolo brothers, those guys showing how effective grappling is and just how fun and entertaining it could be. I could definitely see myself going down that path. I do plan to do competitions up until like that, but I also think it's just like a weight thing. Like, I got to get my weight down. I'm pretty fat fuck right now. I can't lie. 230 pounds. It's like what, 110 kg?
Roughly. Yeah.
How about that? But yeah, I mean, there's no place for me at 230 pounds, 5'10", not even 6 foot, bro, to like go and fight.
Tell that to Daniel Cormier.
But Daniel Cormier was Daniel Cormier was an Olympic level wrestler. This guy's a 2-time UFC
6 months
champion,
of no-gi.
bro.
6 months of no-gi. You'll be fine.
Yeah, maybe, bro. We'll see. But yeah, like just right now trying to get the weight down, and then once I get the weight down, hope is like after I get my degree to start taking in some amateur bouts if my skill is up to par by then, and then maybe from there, who knows? Well, I don't even know what's gonna happen. Yeah, that's the goal, kind of.
Yeah, for sure. So, look, obviously, we're heading into a somewhat odd weekend of fights with Jake Paul and Anderson Silva, which I can't really believe I'm saying. But do you think we're going to see more of these sort of crossover fights moving forward into the future? Or do you think this is a relatively one-off, as, not only due to Jake Paul's popularity, but look, and, he gets a ton of hate, some of it rightfully so, but respect where respect's due. He's put in the work and he has become a legitimate boxer. If you look at his skills, he does have a skill set to actually, at least on paper or to a casual audience, be able to sell this as a competitive fight or sell this as, a legitimate fight. So do you think we're going to see more of these sort of crossovers heading forward?
I kind of hope not, but obviously if it happens, then it happens. I think that ultimately the sport's becoming more kind of unpredictable, with Nate Diaz kind of taking his exit out of the UFC, Mike Perry going over to bare knuckle. I don't know if you guys saw Baka and Saenchai, bare knuckle boxing bout that was just announced.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're seeing these different parallels of combat sports kind of coming all over the place, Cade Rotolo and I think there was just another Sambo competitor just recently competed on the ONE FC card. You have Mikey Musumeci actively calling out, Sambo competitors, the best in Sambo, to kind of compete. So we're seeing kind of like parallels being drawn across all disciplines. And I think boxing is kind of like that one iffy portion, because for grappling, you can kind of get away with it to some extent because it's all sort of loosely connected. But with boxing and like kickboxing, mixed martial arts, it's kind of a whole different ballgame, because while they're all kind of striking related, obviously there's different dynamics, different stances, different kind of setups. Everything is kind of different in terms of how you set it, in terms of how you fight. And I think that respect, like you said, respect where respect's due. Jake Paul has become a boxer, but then again, he hasn't tested himself against an actual boxer. It's been pretty much mixed martial arts competitors having to adapt to the new boxing style, a whole new style of striking, which is the boxing style, getting adjusted to that boxing stance, making sure they have that high guard, making sure they can, keep their distance more properly, because there's no takedowns in boxing. It's just a whole nother ball game. And to kind of put things into perspective, I was actually looking more forward to Tommy Fury versus Jake Paul, because that's I think Tommy Fury is kind of a little bit of the questionable boxing resume and kind of questionable in terms of the sport himself, at least it's kind of two guys on a similar level competing, and that way we'll be able to gauge a little bit more about the logistics behind how authentic Jake Paul's boxing skills are and how good Tommy Fury really is.
100%. Dan, you've done such a wonderful job building, DapperMedia. You've done really well, got a massive following, and for guys like us, we do the same similar thing. We're making content and grinding your ass off. It is a grind, but you're doing really well, and it's awesome to see. What are some of the goals that you have for DapperMedia for the foreseeable future?
Well, for me, that's a good question. Like for me, the DapperMedia is just something I started as a hobby, as something I enjoyed. I've always had kind of like this goal and vision of like building something special, whether it was like doing YouTube as a young kid and just like, getting motivated through that respect, because like for me, a lot of people don't know this, but like when I was a young kid and I was doing YouTube, I would get bullied a lot for doing that. And that was something that was kind of like prevalent in my life. And it kind of just fueled me to a whole nother level where like, I wanted to be successful in this. I wanted to make something of it, and I wanted to do it because I loved it. I just liked the idea of making content and just having that as like kind of a way to build, to better other people's lives. So like for me, my goals with DapperMedia are simple. Like I want to build a community first and foremost. I think the numbers are a little bit unrepresentative of like a real community. I've kind of said this a lot, but like Reels community versus like a real community, kind of like a parallel there. It's very different. It's a very different ball game. Like I would much rather, I'll be honest, like I'm much more content with my Daps MMA community than I am with my DapperMedia community, because like DapperMedia is kind of like the business side of it. I enjoy running it, but also like Daps MMA is more me. Like I get to post my takes. I get to post this stuff. So I think for me, the goal is to kind of have both of them prevalent in my life. Like DapperMedia is kind of like the professional side. I'm trying to be less opinionated on there. And then like Daps MMA is like me, like Dan. That's who it is. And then the goal is to like get the community going strong. Build something special. As of right now, there's not really any interest to cover events, just because like as I mentioned, I don't think that's kind of like it really doesn't get anything done in the grand scheme. I think the podcast format's more kind of enjoyable personally to me. But getting into that sphere of really getting to a whole nother dimension with the fighters, building those connections with the fighters, showing them, like I'm not just like a normal media guy. I'm not really like looking here to exploit you. I want to hear your story. I want to hear you out. And ultimately, I just want to be your friend. I enjoy the sport so much that I want to be around you guys as long as I can be, and covering it to the best of my ability. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Merchandise, whenever like life kind of permits it, and just have fun with it, interview fighters. And yeah, number one thing is just be happy doing it. That's number one thing. If you're not having fun doing it, then there's no point doing it. Like, yeah, that's kind of like my prerogative is like, if I'm not enjoying doing it, if I'm not enjoying the content I'm putting out, why bother doing it? Because I'm already pursuing an education. That's like first and foremost. Yep. And then obviously like my physical health is very important to me too. This is kind of just another thing in there, but I got to enjoy doing it if I want to continue to do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's important for everyone to, understand that you should only really do this as much as you enjoy it. Because I think as well for fans who, on Instagram, on Reddit, and they follow these MMA pages, I think they can tell when, maybe someone's not passionate about what they're making. But look, Dan, heading into our last question, because we don't want to keep too much of your time, as as you said, you're slammed with homework, and I get that, brother. I get that myself. So, look, heading into this weekend, we have an excellent main event with Calvin Kattar and, someone that I've always said to be the dark horse of the division in Arnold Allen. Just wanted to ask, how do you see that fight going? Because, from my perspective, I can kind of see Arnold Allen edging it out in a decision.
I'll be completely honest. I think that Arnold Allen has proven to go the distance. Obviously it's evidenced by the Sadiq Youssef fight. That's a fight where he looked really damn good in every aspect. The striking was on point, the wrestling was on point, the grappling was on point against a game competitor. And then obviously you've got Calvin Kattar, who's a proven, top 5 guy. This is a guy who's been around the corner. He's fought everyone, every style. I think that ultimately I kind of favor Kattar the longer the round goes, the longer the fight goes personally, because, I think that obviously don't read too much into the weight cut, but weight cuts are very taxing and draining on fighters. You know, Arnold Allen kind of didn't look himself this time around. I don't want to say that that's going to be the result of the fight, but I kind of feel like Kattar has molded himself into the weight class a lot better than Arnold Allen. Whereas Allen kind of just, it doesn't really look like to be the natural weight class of Allen. But I do think that Calvin Kattar's got some really good boxing. I think that ultimately the New England Cartel guys kind of have an underrated takedown defense game where like they do get taken down sometimes depending on who it is. But also they kind of have a really good job of making sure they're not getting into positions where a submission is a threat, getting up to the fence immediately. I gotta say, honestly, I favor Calvin Kattar here. I'm gonna go Kattar by decision personally, just because I feel like he's kind of got this really nice, effective striking kind of aspect to him. He's shown, like, I think if he goes a little bit more on the volume side this time around, I think it's gonna be a lot more of his fight. Whereas I think the Emmett fight, while he wasn't throwing a lot, he was landing with a lot more intent. I thought he got robbed personally, but I do think that the longer this fight goes, the longer it's going to favor Kattar, just because he has that 5 round experience. And also, I think that like the earlier Allen can kind of break Kattar down, that also favors him a lot. You know, he's got to mix in that wrestling, he's got to mix in that grappling, really force Kattar on the back foot, because we've seen when Kattar's on that back foot, especially like versus Emmett, he doesn't really have any offense to output in return. It's more so if Allen can kind of put him on the pressure on the back foot like he did Dan Hooker, it's going to make for an interesting fight.
Yeah, 100%. For sure. Well, look, Dan, thank you very much for joining us today, man. We absolutely really love talking to you. And look, man, all the best of luck building the page. We're definitely going to be following to see what you do. And we'd love to have you on again in future, man. Maybe break down a fight card or something.
No, yeah, absolutely, guys. I mean, that's for me, I always like doing these kinds of things. I think it's good for the community to kind of get together, connect, network, and really show these bigger media outlets, these more prevalent personalities in terms of the interviewing game, that, your time is coming to an end. Whether you guys like it or not, this is kind of like a warning message to them. It's just, in actuality, you guys and me, like, we like to network. We get along. We like to help each other out. We understand that this comes from a place of passion, not from a place of greed, not from a place of money. So I think that the main thing for me is, like, I would love to do it. I just love talking to people about fighting. And I think that, like, as we continue to do these things, it just kind of shows that the people who've been around the block and stood the test of time, that their time is eventually going to come to an end and the new age is going to take over, baby.
100%.
Let's do it. All right. Thanks very much, man.